Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. And my fantasy football team, this actually might be my best week so far, and it figures that I'm losing. The guy I'm up against is just barely beating me. He's like 8 points ahead of me. Man, it sucks because this is like my best week. Like Jalen Hurts, man, he's been like dominating this year. Like he's been one of my star players on my team. Let's see who else. Alvin Kamara, he's doing pretty good. Yeah, he's got me 18 points, but like I got 24 points from Hurts just by himself. I mean, he's got me the most points this week by far. He's been kind of my star player this year, so that's pretty cool. Just had to check that real quick. All right, so as promised before, wanted to, just because I thought this would be kind of fun to do, and since it is Halloween, or Halloween is, at the time of recording this podcast, Halloween is tomorrow, but I'm going to release this on Halloween. But anyways, thought this would be fun to do my top 10 scary movie list. Now, similar to what I said with my top 10 anime list, this is something that's, it's a living list. It's probably going to change throughout the course of my life, especially as I watch more movies. And this was a tough list to put together. And to be perfectly honest with you, except for the top 5, the bottom 5, these might be interchangeable. So this is a very close list. I don't want to make it sound like, I think number 9 is way better than number 10. But yeah, I'm just going to give you my top 10 list and then kind of my thoughts on behind why I picked those movies. And then before I go to number 1, I'll also give kind of my honorable mentions, again, like I did for my anime list. And that's going to be kind of how I'll do it for most of my top 10 lists. I think that's how most people do that. But I just kind of wanted to go over some criteria for these films. Really just 3 criteria, and these aren't really like written in stone for me. These are just kind of the things that I use to sort of determine like, what made the list versus what didn't. So number 1, was it scary? Did the movie scare me? And that's really kind of a big one. Like for the movie to make the top 10 list, more than likely it had to scare me at some point. Number 2, was it a well-made film? So sometimes I could forgive a scary movie for being not so scary if it was a well-crafted movie. You'll see a few examples of that in my top 10 list. And then number 3, did it leave a lasting impression on me? So sometimes you see a movie and you think, after you watch it, like maybe while you're watching it, you're a little creeped out by it, but then once it's all said and done, you kind of forget about it. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. Like, did any of these movies, leave a lasting impact on me? Did I remember them, for whatever reason? Was there a scene or a monster or something in those movies that just kind of stayed with me after I watched them? So, I'm not gonna like go over these in detail for every movie, but that was just kind of just to kind of give a general idea of like what made the list. So most likely for anything to make the list, it had to satisfy at least 2 of those, I'll just say, just to be fair. But without further ado, let's get into the top 10 scary movies list. So number 10, Jacob's Ladder from 1990, starring Tim Robbins. This was a movie that I saw it first, or I saw clips of it on I think it was Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments on Sci-Fi, like way back in the day. I still go back and watch that every now and then. And this was a movie that I think I remember seeing it when I was very little, but I didn't quite understand it. And I watch it now as an adult, and this movie just freaks me out every time I watch it. Even to this day, it still freaks me out. It's like it's a very depressing, sad movie, but it does have a lot of beautiful imagery in it. Like I love the scenes of like with Tim Robbins' character, like where he's with who's sort of like his guardian angel in the movie. There's a great scene with him, like where he's, kind of explaining to him, the difference between angels and demons. And it's this really great scene in the movie that I really like. But just some of the imagery in that film, just even today, still freaks me out. Just, you have Tim Robbins' character who's like this, I think he's like a Vietnam War veteran, and he comes back and he thinks that he's been experimented on with like this experimental drug, and he's not sure if he's like hallucinating or if he's like really, and seeing like these just absolutely just horrific, like disturbing images of like demons or if he's truly get like possessed and being messed with by these, otherworldly entities. And just some of the imagery in this movie is so disturbing. Like even to this day, the iconic scene where he's being rolled through like a mental asylum on the stretcher, and you can just see like there's like chunks of human flesh all over the floor, and then there's like these weird little demonic creatures kind of following him around, and even the doctors that are supposed to be operating on him, like their faces start getting more contorted as the scene goes on. It's so disturbing. And then when they put that needle in his head, like that, even just thinking about that makes me so uncomfortable. It's not like the movie itself is fine as far like from a storytelling perspective, but like even to this day, it still makes me uncomfortable, and I still think about it every now and then. Like not very many movies disturb me in the same way that this movie does. Like there's just something about the imagery of this film that just really freaks me out. It's like there's little details they throw in here that if you blink, you'll miss them. Like there's a scene like where he sees these guys in a car drive off, and if you watch closely in the back window, you can see one of them, their faces contorts into sort of like a demonic face. And it's one of those scenes I didn't even notice it for the longest time until I think somebody pointed it out on YouTube. For years I'd never even noticed that. And there's all kinds of little details like that sprinkled throughout the movie. So it's definitely one of those films that I think is worth watching more than once. You'll definitely catch something, I think, the second or third time that you didn't the first time. So I definitely recommend that movie for sure. But it's definitely a downer. The ending it's not an uplifting movie in any way, shape, or form. So if you're going to watch it, just be prepared for a depressing experience. So, number 9, Candyman, the original one from 1992, starring Tony Todd as the title character. I mean, this was one of those movies where it had that urban legend, kind of like Bloody Mary. You stand in front of the mirror, you say the name Candyman, I think it's 5 times in the movie, and then he shows up and kills you. Again, kind of like Jacob's Ladder, this was a movie I saw when I was a kid. The story is a little bit more simple, I think, than Jacob's Ladder. Tony Todd's character as the supernatural character Candyman who shows up and kills people, in a sort of act of revenge for what happened to him when he was alive. Like this is one of those movies, like, number one, it's pretty gory. There's a lot of really disturbing images in the movie. The kills Candyman does to people with his hook hand, even today, is still pretty brutal to watch. And even when they show like his hand, like his hand was removed and they put a hook in there, like in the stump where his hand used to be, it's so graphic and just it's not clean looking at all. It's so disturbing looking. And then Tony Todd's character, I mean, I think he is kind of what elevates this movie. I remember seeing him in the remake of Night of the Living Dead from, I think, 1991 or 1990, somewhere around that time period. I think he's a phenomenal actor, and he's amazing in this movie. Just the way his voice carries, like the cadence in his voice when he speaks, it's so just haunting. And just every scene that he's in, he just completely commands the screen. Supposedly I was watching this, and I guess apparently there's a scene in the movie where he has bees all over him, and he has bees coming out of his mouth. And I guess apparently the actor, they really did do that. They had a trained bee expert, and they had trained bees. I'm not quite sure how you train bees, but anyway, they had trained bees in his mouth, and I think he got stung like something like 70 times or something like that. That is dedication. But I mean, it pays off because it is such a disturbing scene in the movie. And then just like the grotesqueness of like his wounds, like there's a scene where he pulls up his trench coat and you can see like his body is all maimed and beaten, and his skin is all mutilated, and you can see like his rib cage, and it's gruesome to watch for sure. But like I said, just if nothing else, the kills in the movie are just so disturbing to watch. Again, like Jacob's Ladder, it's a movie that like just the imagery of the film has just stayed with me all these years. But again, I think it's mainly because of Tony Todd's performance. I think that has really kind of etched this movie into my mind. It's such an iconic image, like him with that hook hand. I don't know, it stayed with me all this time. I haven't seen the 2020, I think it's kind of a reboot / sequel. I'd like to, though. I heard that Todd supposedly has a cameo appearance in it, so if he does, that definitely has me interested for sure. Number 8, The Silence of the Lambs from 1991, of course starring the legendary actor Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster. So this makes the list. I mentioned before, one of the criteria was if it was a well-made film, but not necessarily scary. So this is a movie that, while the idea of it certainly is creepy for sure, the idea of Hannibal Lecter and the killer Buffalo Bill are definitely creepy. The movie never really scared me that much. Even when I was little, this movie never really scared me. I certainly found it disturbing. There's a lot of creepy images in this movie, but it never really scared me that much. But it's such a fantastic movie. I think if I remember correctly, I think it got nominated for Best Picture. I believe Anthony Hopkins did win Best Actor for it. Like it got nominated for quite a few awards, I think, and that was pretty rare for horror films. Horror films generally don't they don't win a lot of awards. So that was definitely, I think that kind of is a testament to how great this movie is. But yeah, just every scene that Anthony Hopkins is in, he's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, of course, this was the movie that kind of made him like a legendary actor. It made him, a legend in Hollywood. I mean, he is. When you think of Hannibal Lecter, you think of his iconic performance as the character. And then, of course, Jodie Foster is phenomenal, as well as Clarice Starling, the detective who's trying to solve the mystery of this murderer named Buffalo Bill. And she's an FBI agent in training, and she's basically using Hannibal Lecter, who is locked up, but he's essentially like a genius psychiatrist, and she's trying to use his intellect to figure out who Buffalo Bill is and try to stop him before he can, claim his next victim. And that's basically the movie. So it's such an interesting idea for a story. I'd never really seen anything that was quite like that before. I know it's based off of a book series, and I'd really like to check that out sometime. But yeah, like it's one of my favorite films. I go back and I watch it, over and over again. It's such a great movie. Yeah, this definitely has a strong recommendation from me for sure. Okay, and next on the list, number 7, The Witch from 2016. So I watched this movie. I think it's on Hulu now, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I know The Northman is on there, which I think is from the same director. But yeah, this movie, number one, I will say, I love this movie. I think it's a phenomenal movie. The only thing is, though, it's kind of hard to understand what the characters are saying. My understanding is the filmmakers tried to make this as historically accurate as they could. So like the way the characters speak in the movie, they are speaking English, but it's supposed to take place in, I can't remember, it's like the 1600s. So like it takes place in New England, and of course the characters are speaking English, but it's 1600s English, so it's not anything like how we speak now. So it's kind of hard at times to understand exactly what the characters are saying, but man, the performances in this movie are amazing. Robert Eggers, I think that's the name of the guy. I think he's the guy who also directed The Northman, if I'm not mistaken, and also The Lighthouse too. So yeah, but this movie, oh my god, it's hard to explain exactly like why this movie works so well for me. Yes, it is scary. It's got a lot of creepy images in it for sure. The performances are all great all around. It's got two actors from Game of Thrones in it, including Anya Taylor-Joy, and I think her very first performance, if I'm not mistaken. I think this was like her first like movie role. Like the acting all around in this movie is great. But what I like about this movie is that, yes, there are supernatural elements to it, but I also like just like this sense of, I don't know, the tension the movie builds throughout it. Like you see this family as they're kicked out of their community and they have to go live on the edge of this really disturbing, creepy looking forest. And even though like the threat of like something supernatural lurking amongst them is there, it's like even from the beginning, this definitely seems like a family that almost kind of seems doomed in a sense, if that makes sense. But yeah, like it's so disturbing. It has such great imagery in it. Like the ending scene, I don't want to ruin it in case anyone listening to this hasn't seen it yet, but the ending, like with the music and everything that happens, is just like haunting. It has like in my opinion, one of the most haunting endings that I've ever seen. It's truly phenomenal. Also, too, I saw something, I guess this was kind of interesting little bit of trivia. There's a goat in the movie named Black Phillip, I think is his name. And supposedly he actually like seriously injured one of the actors during filming. Like he's supposed to be, I think, like this possessed animal that kind of goes crazy. But like, I guess he actually really did hurt like one of the main actors while they were filming it and put him in the hospital because I guess they couldn't get him to mind. So it's kind of interesting. I guess it worked in the film's favor. But yeah, I mean, like, of course, like it just like the title implies, there's a witch, and there's a lot of things that kind of happen between the family trying to figure out like what's going on their farm, as well as this witch that appears to be living in this in the forest close to their home. Yeah, like it's definitely creepy. There's not really much in the way of jump scares in this movie. It's more atmospheric, along with creepy imagery, like I said before. But it just works. It's a good movie. It's a slow burn, though, like I said, and I've heard some people say that they found it kind of boring and uninteresting. I disagree. I think it's a fantastic horror film, but I can definitely understand where some people would be put off by it. Again, I think a lot of it's because of like the way the characters speak, the fact that there's not a lot happens throughout at least the first, I would say probably good third or half of the film. I mean, stuff does happen, but it takes a while for the really creepy stuff to kind of get going. But I don't know. For my money, I really love this movie. I thought it was fantastic. Next on the list is number 6, The Descent from 2006. So I'm not super claustrophobic, but I don't like being in tight, confined spaces. I'm definitely more afraid of heights than anything else. But man, this movie makes me so uncomfortable to watch. Even now, like I've watched it several times now, and even going back and watching it now, this film still just makes me so uncomfortable. The story follows a group of young women who like to explore caves. And they find this one cave that apparently has never been explored before, so they go in and check it out. And of course, in typical scary movie fashion, things go horribly wrong and they get stuck in the cave. And they eventually find out that they're not alone, that there's actually some weird humanoid creatures in there trying to hunt them. The monsters in the movie are fine. They're not particularly scary in my opinion. They kind of make me think of like creatures that would be in like a Blade film, sort of. They look almost like vampire creatures. I mean, they're creepy. They're fine. To me, the real star of the movie, the real scary nature of the film comes from just the cave itself and just the idea of being trapped and completely cut off from the outside world. There's a scene in the movie that to me it's one of the most uncomfortable scenes that I've ever seen in film. And it's a scene where the main character is trying to crawl through a tunnel, and she's got maybe a foot and a half tops worth of space to get through, and she gets stuck. And that scene, I mean, they try to make it look as real as they could. I think they actually I think the cave itself, they filmed like on a soundstage. I don't think it was actually done inside a real cave for safety concerns, obviously. But they did a really good job of making the set look like a legitimate cave. And this scene where she is stuck in this tunnel it still makes me so uncomfortable watching it. Like, it is such an effective scene, and I think it brilliantly captures the feeling of being in a tight, confined space and just freaking out and not knowing what to do and kind of wanting to go into panic. Like, I actually found myself panicking for the character when I first saw that scene. I remember just watching it and just thinking, like, I can't take this. I can't deal with this shit. This is too much. Yeah, and like I said, the creatures, they show up about, I want to say halfway through the film. It's a fairly good ways in. And again, they're fine. They definitely add some good scary moments in there. If nothing else, there's some good jump scares you get out of the creatures. But to me, the true terror of the film just comes from the idea of being stuck in a cave. So yeah, that's a good one to check out for sure. So now we're going to get into the top 5 list. And these movies, again, like I said before, these movies are ones that are very close. This was a tough one. These were tough to narrow down. I mean, this entire list was tough to put together, but these ones especially, it was really difficult to decide what order these would go in, except for number 1 for me personally. So again, like I said, this is very much a living list. This could change at any point in time, and who knows, maybe next Halloween, if I do another list like this, maybe this will change. We'll see. But anyways, number 5, The Poughkeepsie Tapes from 2007. Some of you may not even be familiar with this movie. I think I just kind of happened upon it just by pure dumb luck. So I remember when I was in high school and I saw a preview for this movie. I was in a small theater and I saw a trailer for this, and I don't remember ever seeing anything else about it. I don't remember seeing it advertised on TV or seeing critics talk about it. I never saw it in theaters, and to this day I have not seen a DVD or Blu-ray copy of it. I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure you could probably find on Amazon, but I actually watched this on, I think, MySpace. I think someone posted it on MySpace years and years ago. It was either MySpace or YouTube. Like someone had just uploaded the entire movie, and that's where I watched it. I've only watched it, like, I think one time from beginning to end. Then that was enough. This movie stuck with me. This is not a movie that I particularly. I don't want to say that I don't like it. It's just, it's a movie that I've seen once and I don't really plan on watching it again. But man, I remember this movie. One time was enough for me. This is one of those films that it's scary, but it's scary in a different kind of way that a movie like The Descent is scary. The Descent is terrifying to me because it captures the feeling of claustrophobia and there's some decent jump scares in it. The Poughkeepsie Tapes to me is scary because this feels like a movie that could really happen. So the film is essentially about an FBI investigation into trying to capture a killer known as the Water Street Butcher. It's filmed like a documentary, but it is fictional. I'm not sure if it was based on a real killer, a real murderer or not, but the killer in the movie is a fictional killer. And what makes this movie, I think, so even more effective to me is, well, first I'll kind of talk about what makes the movie kind of interesting and different from what you might have seen. It's a found footage. Well, it's kind of filmed like two different movies. One is a found footage movie, and then the other part is like the FBI investigation into the killer. Now, the found footage portion, what makes it different in this film is that it's filmed from the point of view of the killer. So he actually has a camera, and we see the murders take place from his perspective. And he's basically documented all of his murders for years and years and left them on tapes in his home. And then the police catch them. They find his house. They get the tapes. They don't catch him, though. And then the rest of the movie is basically just their investigation, trying to find him, trying to figure out his MO, how he operates, what he does, all that stuff. And of course, they never catch him. This movie, I mean, the best way I can describe it is it just bothered me in a way that not very many movies have. This was one of those movies, like, when it was all said and done, I just felt I just felt violated. Like, the killer in this movie is just so disturbing. What makes him especially disturbing to me is that he's not like Hannibal Lecter. Like, he's not an especially intelligent person. I mean, he's reasonably smart. The way they establish him, he's got, I would say, definitely well above average IQ, but he's not a genius by any means. But he always seems to be just a couple steps ahead of law enforcement. But just the scenes, the grisly way that he kills people, that he tortures them, he uses theatrics sometimes in the movie, like where he'll wear these masks and he puts on almost like these Shakespearean performances before he tortures his victims, and it's hard to watch. And then just the idea that, like, we know who he is and we know what he's going to do. So watching the murders from his perspective, because we see him kind of hitchhike and he tries to get people to let him in his car so he can get in close to them. And it's like the whole time you're watching and you just want to scream at the TV to the victims, like, no, don't let him in the car. Just drive off, leave him there. Like, it's one of those movies. And it's just, yeah, it's so disturbing. And that's the part about the movie that I find the most terrifying is that, even though we never see what he looks like, it's established that he's a very unassuming looking person. He just looks like an average guy. So you could pass anybody on the street and they could be someone like him, which I guess is kind of the point of the movie if I had to guess. But yeah, this movie just really bothered me. I mean, I do recommend it because I think it is a well-made movie for the most part. The acting is fine for the most part, but it's just one of those movies that just really disturbed me and really freaked me out. But it's, again, kind of like Jacob's Ladder. This is not an uplifting movie, so I don't recommend watching it if you're the kind of person that gets easily bothered by stuff like that. So, number 4, The Thing from 1982, from John Carpenter, starring Kurt Russell. Man, what a great movie. I mean, I wanted to put this higher up on the list. This movie, it scared me more when I was little. I can't really say it scares me that much now, although it does have some pretty good effective jump scares. It's got one in particular that still, even to this day, still kind of gets me. But yeah, basically the story takes place in Antarctica. Kurt Russell's team discovers an alien that crash landed there, I think, thousands of years ago, and it has the ability to change its shape and mimic the appearance of anyone that it consumes. So it slowly starts consuming the team one by one, taking on their form, but then also taking on other grotesque, monstrous forms as the movie goes on. Man, this movie to me is just such a shining example of like why special effects are so great. The effects of the monster in this movie are just, even to this day, they still look great. They still look, the animatronics and everything on them is just so good. I think there's like one scene of stop motion. I could be wrong. I feel like maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm thinking of a different movie. But I could have sworn there's a scene of stop motion where we see the creature's final form near the end of the movie. I could be misremembering it. I can't talk. But man, this is one of those movies where I feel like every time I watch it, I notice little details that I didn't catch the first time. Mainly with like the creature and just like the disgusting forms that it takes. Like there's one form, like I think it's the first one we see, like where it tries to eat this sled dog, and it turns into like this absolutely disgusting, like just gooey, goopy dog creature, and like its head blows up, and we see like just a bunch of little tongues hanging out of it, and it's like I never noticed that the first time I watched it, and it's so disgusting. And like it has that great scene with where they get the idea to try to figure out who's the thing with the blood test, where they take blood samples from everybody and they burn it because they discover that, every living cell of the thing is, alive and wants to stay alive and will try to defend itself. So they burn this blood in the hopes that, the thing's blood will react to it. And man, even to this day, it still gets me. I know it's coming, but it still gets me. That jump scare where they burn the blood. I think what makes it so effective is that Kurt Russell is not expecting it, so we're not expecting it. So when he goes and sticks that burning needle in there and it jumps out at him, it's such a good fucking scare. Everything about this movie is great, and to me, it still holds up well. They did another version of it in 2011, which I watched, which was fine. It doesn't hold a candle to the original, because I think they originally planned to use more practical effects, but then they lean more towards CGI, and I think the movie really suffers for it. It especially doesn't help that the CGI in that movie is not the best. Now, the original, definitely recommend it, which I think it was actually, I think the 1982 movie is a remake of one from the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was called The Thing from Another World. Similar premise, just an older movie. Never saw that one, though, but may have to check that one out down the road. But yeah, this movie, I come back to it every so often. It's such a fantastic, well-made, scary movie. All right, number 3, Hereditary from 2018. So, kind of similar to how I felt about the Poughkeepsie tapes. I've only seen this movie once, and once was enough. I don't know if I'll ever go back and watch it again. I mean, I know I should, because I've heard a lot of people say that there's a lot of details that you kind of miss the first time watching it. But man, this movie, this movie left just such a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, in a good way, which I know sounds weird. But yeah, the story follows Toni Collette and her family. She works as a person who makes like miniatures, essentially, which they use that in a clever way to show transitions between scenes in the film. I really dug that about the movie. But essentially, the movie is trying to come to grips with the death of Toni Collette's youngest daughter. And we see that they have a sort of like a connection to like some weird cult that I guess her mother had. And the cult starts kind of resurfacing, and we see them kind of have the impact that they're having on their family. And then some supernatural things start to happen that has to do with the cult and this demon lord that they worship. I don't want to go too much more into it than that. It's definitely a weird movie for sure. I'm sure there's a lot about that I missed, so maybe I will need to go back and watch it again a second time. But man, I mean, just number one, this movie has a powerhouse performance from Toni Collette. Just the scenes with her where she just loses her shit on her family and her son especially, and they get into these heated arguments throughout the film. I mean, I don't know if she won an award for that movie or if she was at least nominated. If she wasn't, then that to me is a crime, because she is phenomenal in this movie. Like, she definitely carries it. And just some of the most disturbing scenes in this movie involve her character. There's one scene in the movie that even now still stays with me. It's the scene towards the end where we see Toni Collette's character, where she basically becomes possessed by the evil force that's tormenting their family. And we see her when she's chasing her son throughout their house in the dark, and that scene's creepy. But like right before that, there's a scene that I almost didn't catch until I saw somebody on YouTube point it out, because they had a video on YouTube where they lit this scene up so you could see it a little bit better. Like, they turned up the brightness, and you can see there's a scene in the movie where the son is in his room looking around, and on the wall behind him you can see Toni Collette's character like kind of climbing along the walls like Exorcist 3 style. And it is so disturbing to watch. Just everything about this movie is just so disturbing. But to me, I think the scene that really broke me, that's a good way to describe this movie. This movie broke me. Like, it just took my senses and just destroyed them. But the scene in this movie where you see the daughter get killed and they actually show it, not everything, but you do see it happen. And you kind of have to sit there in the aftermath with the older son after it happens. I remember watching that, and I just remember thinking, like, holy fucking shit. Like, I couldn't believe that it happened, because it's such a brutal scene, and it's something that you don't see happen in a lot of scary films. Even some of the most gruesome movies, they don't show stuff like that. And then just, like, he goes home, and, like, he just kind of climbs into bed, and you can tell he's just so distraught over this, because it's like, how do you process something so horrible happening to you? And then, like, you hear his parents find his sister's body the next morning. They don't show it, but you hear them, and you hear the mom screaming and just agonizing, just sorrow over that. It is such an emotionally powerful and just fucked up scene. I mean, this movie, that's good way to describe this movie. It's such an emotionally powerful, fucked up movie. Man, like, maybe I do need to go back and watch it again now that I'm talking about it. But man, yeah, this movie definitely stuck with me for a very long time. Okay, number 2, The Exorcist from 1973. So this movie almost made number 1 for me. And this is, again, kind of to go back to my criteria, this movie to me checked all 3 of those boxes. It's a scary movie. It scared the shit out of me when I was younger, and it still scares me to this day. It's an exceptionally well-made film. Again, I think kind of like Silence of the Lambs, I want to say, I could be wrong, but I thought this movie was nominated for an award. I could be wrong about that. So don't quote me on that. And also, too, this movie left such a lasting impact on me. I remember hearing stories about it, like, when it first premiered, and, like, people had to go to therapy after seeing this movie because of just some of the subliminal images that they put in it, and I could definitely understand for sure. But yeah, the story follows an actress played by Ellen Burstyn who has a daughter named Reagan who starts acting really strange, and it turns out that while her mother thinks that she's just got some either a mental issue or some kind of medical condition causing her to act out, it turns out that she's actually possessed by a demon, and so the mother calls in a couple of priests to try to perform an exorcism, and that's essentially, in a nutshell, that's the movie. But I think what makes the movie really effective and scary is, I think it's the idea of, like, the lack of control the mother has. And I think the true terror of the movie, at least for me, always comes from the idea of, like, something is wrong with someone that you love, someone that you care about, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, like when a family member gets sick, and, like, you would do anything in your power to help them feel better, but you just know that you can't. There's nothing you can do to help them. And just that feeling of helplessness that you have is just so terrifying. And I think this movie does a great job of capturing that. But it also doesn't hurt that on a supernatural level, this movie is fucking terrifying. Like, the supernatural shit that happens to the daughter in this movie, even to this day, still holds up as being genuinely terrifying. You don't get a lot of the demon. There are little clips of, like, its image in the movie. Again, the subliminal images that I mentioned before that they sprinkled in throughout the film. And they do a great job of really making this disturbing. It's such an uncomfortable movie to watch in some scenes, but like, I think the other part of the movie that really makes it so effective is just watching this little girl deteriorate. Linda, what was her name? Linda Blair, I think, is the actress that played the young girl Reagan, and just watching her turn in from, like, you know, this innocent little girl into, you know, basically a monster throughout the film is just so terrifying to watch. Like, watching her go from really sweet and really, you know, kind and soft-spoken to just spewing profanities all over the place and saying even what I would consider by today's standards to be pretty, you know, effed up language to be saying in a movie. And then, of course, the iconic, you know, final confrontation in the end between her and Father Merrin and Father Karras, you know, in the exorcism, is such a powerful scene to watch. I remember reading that to make the movie, I think the scenes where they're performing the exorcism, you can see, like, the character's breath when they talk because the room is so cold. I guess apparently the stage that they filmed that on, the set, I guess they either had it in a freezer or they turned down the temperature so low that it actually made it like below 20 degrees in there. And then I guess the director, he wanted to get, like, the most authentic, like, screams of terror from his actors, I think from Ellen Burstyn, the main actress. And so what he did was, I think he allegedly he fired a gun off right behind her, and then they filmed her reaction because he wanted to get the most genuine scream he could out of her, and he knew that that was the only way to do it. And I remember hearing that, I'm just thinking, if that's true, that's fucked up. I mean, I guess it works. You can't argue with results, but it's like, dude, that's a dick move, man. But yeah, I mean, the movie has stood the test of time as being one of the greatest scary movies ever made, and even to this day, I think it still holds up. Not much in the way of jump scares. In fact, there's really not any now that I think about it. It's purely atmospheric, but it sets up such a great atmosphere throughout the entire movie. So that leaves the final spot, the number one film on my list. But before I get to that movie, I do want to go over just a few honorable mentions. And so these are movies that I do enjoy them. I've watched them a few times, and I definitely understand their significance in the horror movie genre. These just didn't scare me as much as the ones on my list. I don't think these are bad by any means. These are definitely great films. It's just, for me personally, I just never found them that scary or disturbing. Some of you may disagree with me on that, and feel free to, comment below on my YouTube channel if if there's things that what your favorite movies are, if you agree with this list or not. But anyways, and these aren't in any particular order. I'm just kind of naming them off. So first one is Jaws, the original one from 1975. I mean, it definitely scared me more when I was younger. It doesn't bother me that much anymore. I remember when I was a kid, I was kind of afraid to get in any body of water because of this movie. And of course, the iconic soundtrack of the film, even to this day, still holds up and does a good job of building up that feeling of dread, knowing that something's coming for you. But yeah, I mean, in my mind, it's fine. It's a good movie. I know they had a lot of problems with like the mechanical shark they built. It just never really bothered me that much. So it didn't quite make the list, but it came close. Next up is The Conjuring, the first film. I have seen the movie Annabelle, but I haven't, and I saw a little bit of The Conjuring too, but I haven't seen anything else in I think they call the Conjuring universe, so I haven't seen any of that. I really like this movie. The story of Ed and Lorraine Warren as they try to help this family being tormented by this demonic entity. It's a good film. It's got quite a bit of jump scares in it, but I do think they do work in service of the film. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of jump scares, especially if they're overused in a movie, but in this movie's case, I think it does a good job, and for the most part, I think that they're earned. And there's enough creepy imagery and atmosphere in it that I think it works fine. So, again, good movie, very well made, well acted for the most part. Just didn't quite make the list for me. It just didn't quite scare me as much as the other ones on my top 10 list did. Next up is Nightmare on Elm Street, the original from 1984. I really enjoy this movie. Again, I've gone back and I've watched it several times. Even to this day, I think it still holds up pretty well. It's pretty dated, honestly, by today's standards, but it still works fine. Freddy Krueger was never really one of the movie monsters that scared me quite as much as some of the others, but I found him to be pretty effective, and just the whole idea that, he comes after you in your dreams, so it's like, you can't escape him, you gotta sleep sometime, you'll literally die if you don't sleep, so it works. I saw the remake in 2009, and that movie exists. That's all I'll say about that. All right, next up, Alien, the original from 1979. I love the movie Aliens. Aliens is probably one of my top 10 favorite movies list ever. I'll get to that list at some point in the future. But the original movie from 1979, starring Sigourney Weaver and Tom Skerritt, I definitely understand its place, as a iconic horror movie legend. And yeah, it's got some good creepy atmosphere in it, as well as one really good jump scare placed in the movie. But just for me personally, while I did find it disturbing, it never really quite scared me like a lot of the other films did. And I never found myself going back and watching it that much. Like repeat viewings for the other movies, like my top 10 list, those happen quite a bit. But for this movie, I've really only seen it a couple of times. Again, I like it. I think it's a fine movie. It's just, I don't know. For me personally, I always felt like it was just missing something. It's got atmosphere. It's got a great creature effects. The Xenomorph, of course, is an iconic movie monster. But I don't know. Just for me, this movie just was missing some quality that I can't quite put my finger on it, that just prevents it from being on my top 10 list. But it's a great movie nonetheless. And finally, the original Halloween from 1978. Again, I was never really too scared of movie characters like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees, even though there does kind of seem to be sort of a supernatural element to them, I think a lot of what makes them less scary to me is that, unlike a lot of the creatures and monsters on my list, these are for the most part just regular guys. Yeah, they're probably superhuman strong, but they are just regular guys. So it's like at least there's kind of a sense that you could get away from them. Like if you ran, you could probably get away from them just because they walk after all their victims. So yeah, but I mean, Halloween, even to this day, I mean, it's dated, but I think it still holds up pretty well. It's got some good jump scares in it. Of course, like Jaws, it's got that iconic music. I've always liked the movie. I like the setup with it. I like the setup with Laurie Strode's character and Dr. Loomis. I always liked his dynamic between him and Michael Myers. So yeah, this movie just, even though I never found it particularly scary, it just, I don't know, it's always held a special place in my heart among scary movies. And I've talked about Halloween Ends and stuff on this channel too, so I'll leave it at that. But now, on to my number one movie on my list. And some of you may agree with this, some of you may disagree, some of you may even laugh at this, but this is just me being honest. And the scariest movie that I have ever seen is The Grudge from 2004, starring Sarah Michelle Gellar. I believe this was directed by Sam Raimi from the Evil Dead movies. Where do I even begin with this movie? So I'm just going to give a very short story about this film and kind of my experience when I first saw it. I saw this movie when I first started driving years and years ago in high school. And I think this was one of the first things I went to go drive to go see on my own. And I saw it in theaters. What would it have been? Or no, because it came out in 2004. I don't think I was quite old enough to drive at that point. Well, regardless, I went to theaters to see it, and I was by myself, which was a stupid idea. And I walked into the theater right when the very first jump scare in the movie happens, where there's this character who's looking up into this attic, and right before she sees something scary, I walk into the theater, and I turn with my back to the screen to try to find a seat, and that's when the jump scare happens. And I just remember I dove for my seat. And just from then on out, I was terrified for the rest of the movie. This movie fucked me up. I mean, this movie just scared me on a level that I don't think any other movie ever has. So to give a brief synopsis of the film, Sarah Michelle Gellar works as like a caretaker, I believe is her job in Japan, and she's taking care of this house and this family. Well, in the house, this family was brutally murdered, and there's a legend in Japan in this movie where anyone who dies or is murdered in the grip of a powerful emotion like anger or sadness, it leaves basically a curse on that place, and it kills anybody who gets near it. And so Sarah Michelle Gellar goes into this house, which is basically cursed, and she finds herself being haunted by the spirits of the family that was there that was murdered, mainly the son and the mother. And it's the mother that I want to talk about. That's the thing that really gets me. The mother, Kayako, played by the actress, I think her name is Takako Fuji. Holy shit. Kayako might be the most terrifying thing that has ever been put on film. Just everything about her, like the way she stares at you with that big, almost horrified look on her face with her eyes wide open staring at you. Her pale, emotionless expression, and then, of course, that iconic croaking noise she makes. Even to this day, I don't even like imitating that noise because it just makes me so uncomfortable. I remember one of my buddies used to make that noise to me in high school, and I just remember just being like, dude, I swear I'll fucking kill you if you keep doing that. Like, if you ever call me on my phone and make that sound, I'll kill you. Like, I mean, just everything about her just freaks me out. I had nightmares about her for the longest time because of that movie. There's so many scenes with her in it that work so well. Like there's a scene where she's crawling up this dark staircase trying to get this character, and you just barely catch a glimpse of her face as she stares at them. That scene freaks me out. This movie made me afraid of staircases. Like there's a scene in the end of the movie, again, another iconic scene where she's crawling down the staircase after Sarah Michelle Gellar's character making that disturbing croaking sound, which I read somewhere was actually the director of the film that actually made that sound. So that's kind of interesting. Who I guess has worked with the actress that plays Kayako. But man, I mean, just everything about her character is just so disturbing. I don't know. Beyond what I just described, I don't know what it is about her that makes her so terrifying to me. But like, You give me my pick between Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, uh, any of the other monsters I've named in these other movies, and I'll gladly take them instead of Kayako. Just something about her is just so disturbing to me. And just the idea that, like, you go into this house and you get cursed and there's nothing you can do. You're basically fucked at that point. Like, this ghost is going to get you. She's going to fucking terrify the shit out of you before she kills your ass. I mean, just this movie, just like I said, no other movie has just disturbed me and scared the ever-loving shit out of me like this movie did. Today, it doesn't bother me quite as much as it did back then, and from a technical perspective, the movie itself is fine. It's got the performances are great. I think Sarah Michelle Gellar is really good in this movie. It's not an especially great movie necessarily, but it is well made. The sequel was okay. The first one to me is the best one. It was based on, and of course, this is supposed to be like the American remake of the original version from Japan called Ju-on, which, if I'm not mistaken, I think it had the same actress who played Kayako in that one, or it could be a different actress. I'm not sure. The funny thing is, the actress that plays Kayako in that movie, like, I've seen her in real life, and she's like stunning. Like, she's really pretty in real life. But man, she gets that makeup on and just makes that, and like they have that sound coming out of her mouth, and she is just nightmare fuel incarnate. I mean, just, oh my god, it just freaks me out. I remember for the longest time, I didn't even like watching that clip on YouTube or anything because it just scared me so much. And even to this day, it still bothers me. Admittedly, not as much as it did then, but it still scares me. So, like, I was afraid of staircases and attics for the longest time because of that movie. So I guess that was kind of the lasting impression that it left on me. So, but yeah, that definitely takes my number one spot easily. Maybe someday that movie will be dethroned, but for now, The Grudge stands above them all as, in my opinion, being the scariest movie that I've ever seen. So take that for what you will. You can laugh at me if you want. Maybe some of you agree with me, but I'm curious to know if you guys want to comment on YouTube and let me know what are your top 10 favorite scary movies. I'd be curious to know about that. But anyways, guys, I think that's going to conclude tonight's episode. Everybody stay safe out there and happy Halloween.